Chris, thank you. Aren't we lucky to have one of only 13 presidential libraries in the entire country, and one of them is here, right here in Orange County, Yorba Linda? Absolutely. We are so fortunate for many reasons, not the least of which to mention the amazing speakers that we have that visit this stage. But we also appreciate and enjoy a wonderful relationship between the city and the library, the foundation, and the great working relationship that we have. Chris, thank you for all the work that you so tirelessly do on our behalf. Let's give him a hand, would you please? We have a number of important people here, dignitaries, but I would be remiss if I didn't call out in particular the mayor of Yorba Linda, my replacement, Gene Hernandez. Gene, would you stand up and say hi? The list is long, but we'll stop with that with your permission, if that's okay. When Chris asked if I would be part of the introduction, I misunderstood, actually. I thought that I was going to be able to introduce Gretchen, and he thought, no, I was going to be able to introduce him, Chris. And so we solved it the way that two adults solve it, right? Rock, paper, scissors. So look at this guy. In one glance, you can tell he's a rock, right? So I immediately went for paper. Well, he outthought me, and so, I lost. But the good part of being a former mayor in the city of Yorba Linda is I was able to say best out of 3, then best out of 5. Got to best out of 11, but eventually I won, and it is my pleasure to be able to introduce our guest speaker. As I've said, this stage has been host to many people. In the last year alone, we have had the Cheneys, Vice President Cheney and his wife. We have had Secretary of Defense Don Rumsfeld. We've had Secretary of State Henry Kissinger. The list is amazing, and today's guest is no less amazing than all of those before her. We are very privileged to have Gretchen Carlson with us. Now, you may know her from the wonderful work that she's done. You might know her as an international expert, an international journalist, renowned journalist. You might know her as the host of the Fox News show after her own book, really. Was it Real Story? Anybody know her from Real Story? Hey, come on, give me some little action here. How many know or remember Gretchen as Miss America from 1989? There's an applause. Or musical prodigy, a violinist extraordinaire. Anybody know her from the musical world? It's got a few, come on. Education, educated at Stanford and Oxford as well. Or one of my personal favorites, a woman of faith. Woman of faith who, there we go, appreciate it, wonderful. Gretchen talks and writes about the privilege she has of leading Sunday school with her husband, and I love that about her. She is the wife of one, mother of two. I had to practice that. I was sure I was going to say wife of two and mother of one. Wife of one, mother of two. She has a wonderful host of things that she's done, but even if you know all of those things about Gretchen, if you haven't had a chance to read her book, I would say you only know half the story. When Chris had asked me if I would be willing to give some introductions, I said, well, I would love to read her book ahead of time, so he got me an advance copy. It's brand new out, and I had a chance to read this. The first thing that I did when Mayor Hernandez and I drove up today is I went and bought a second book. This is a book that we call a gift book. You buy one for yourself, and you buy a second one to be able to give away. So I bought a second one for my daughter as well. This is something I think she needs to be able to read. I hope that you enjoy the lecture as much as I have thoroughly enjoyed the book. Would you please join me in welcoming the beautiful, the talented, the inspirational Gretchen? Welcome.
Thank you. Now look how I suddenly got so tall. You know what? I don't think I'm going to use this apple box. I think I'm fine right here. Can you still see me? Okay, I'm going to move this out of the way then. Well, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. I just want to start by saying that I'm far away from my real life family, my one husband and my 2 children. They're back on the East Coast, but I have my brother-in-law here this morning. Michael Close has come from San Diego, so thank you so much, Michael. And last night I was at the Reagan Library. When I was Miss America, I had the good fortune of meeting President Reagan in the Oval Office. They have the replica of the Oval Office there. So last night I was in the Oval Office. Today I'm in the East Room. I mean, can it get any better? And just to further the Miss America connection, the folks who run this wonderful library here just pulled some videotape for me in the back room of President Nixon meeting two Miss Americas that they have on videotape here. They went through 46 million documents to find that, and it was Phyllis George from 1970 and Laurel Lee Schaefer, who was the year after her, so that was fascinating to see. Well, I want to tell you a couple of things that you may not know about me to get started. I'm 100% Swedish, natural blonde, high school valedictorian, grew up in the Halloween capital of the world, Anoka, Minnesota. I'm not the shortest Miss America ever. I hate putting on makeup in my off time. I don't know how to type. I can't whistle. I can't parallel park. I grew up a chubby kid, which I will get to later on. And before I had 2 rounds of braces, I could fit this finger between my 2 front teeth. So why did I want to write Getting Real? I wrote this book because I want people to know the real me. People sometimes get impressions of television personalities that aren't necessarily accurate, that they've never had any struggles in their life, that everything has always come easy, that one day they just got that golden phone call from some New York executive who said, "Hey, you want to come to New York and be a star?" And that's not at all how my life played out. The real me, serious child violinist from the age of 6, the young woman who took on the challenge as a novice to try and become Miss America, the television journalist for the last 25 years, the mother of 2, my prized possessions and the loves of my life, and a woman who tries to balance work and family, and also a woman of faith. You know, my mother always told me when she put me to bed at night after we said prayers, she would say, "Gretchen, you know you can be anything you want to be." And I believed her. Not that I didn't think it would come with a tremendous amount of hard work and perseverance and pitfalls along the way, but that is such an important lesson, and it's one huge lesson in my book about instilling in our own children that kind of self-confidence. She also said to me, God gave you talents, and he expects you to make the most of them. So this was the origin of my passion to pursue goals, my fire in my belly, my competitive spirit, and the fierce determination that underlines everything that I do. So I want to read you an excerpt from the book of what I tell my kids at night. We all have some luck in our lives, but I don't tell my children, maybe you'll get lucky. I tell them to work hard and study and give every challenge their all. I make sure that they understand what it means to have strong values and always strive to do the right thing. My dream as a young girl was to play the violin on a world stage. No one told me I wasn't good enough or skinny enough or any other enough. My life stretched out ahead of me full of possibility, and I lived with the ever-present idea that I could do anything if I set my mind to it and I was true to myself. So I had a wonderful upbringing. My grandfather was a Lutheran minister in town, and I learned my religious foundation from him, and I also learned perseverance, because when he started at our church, there were 800 members, and when he retired, there were 8,500. Making it the second largest Lutheran church in America. And I was so blessed to have the parents that I had. All my relatives lived within 1 mile of my small town, and I'm so blessed to still have my parents in my life so that my children can get to know them as well. My goal as a child was to be a famous concert violinist. And people say to me, well, how did you start playing the violin? It really was a fluke, which is another part of my storyline, that life works in mysterious ways, right? Or God sometimes does as well. So I wanted to play the piano. And we went up to the neighborhood piano teacher. She took one look at my hands. She said, oh, she'll never be any good. Her hands are way too small. Just have her go up to the local junior high and see if she can find some other instrument to play. And so I picked a violin. It was hanging on the wall. It was the smallest instrument. I thought the cello was too big, the string bass for sure. And so I took the violin home, and it just happened to click. But it was also sort of a conundrum in my early life of people not really understanding who I was as a kid who was practicing 3 and 4 hours a day. And I just wanted to fit in, to be honest with you. So I want to read from my first chapter, which is entitled Sparkles, the nickname my grandfather gave me. My heart was beating in my throat, my hands felt clammy. Waiting in the wings for my name to be announced, I closed my eyes and repeated the words to the Lord's Prayer once again. At 13, I was about to give the biggest performance of my life. The Minnesota Orchestra was on stage at Orchestra Hall, playing the rousing piece, Fanfare for the Common Man. Music was fast-paced, and I was up next to perform a solo, the first movement of Lalo's Symphony Espagnole. When the soundproof doors opened, a rush of cold air came at me, and I began the long walk across the stage, violin in hand. I was a chubby girl, awkward in my floor-length white dress, but on that day, I was a concert artist who would lead an entire orchestra in a performance at 13. Although it was only 10:30 in the morning, the auditorium was full for the orchestra's popular coffee concert. And today, that stage belonged to me. After the performance, the audience rose to their feet, cheering, "Bravo! Bravo!" The applause seemed to go on forever, and I returned for encore bows. It was a thrilling moment, but then it was over. Normal life resumed. Back in the dressing room, I changed out of my long white dress, and my mom drove me to school. I got there in time for math class, where we had a test. My fellow students didn't have any clue where I had been that day. To them, I was just one of the kids. They didn't understand the other me, the one who had just performed with the Minnesota Orchestra. So that was my goal in life. And then things changed when I was about 17 years old. I want to go back into one of the ways, though, in which I raised my self-esteem, aside from doing well in school and concentrating on academics and also my violin talent. And actually, it's a blessing in disguise in retrospect because I was a chubby kid. I struggle still today with my weight because you know what? My favorite hobby is eating. I just know how to manage it a little bit better now. But my mom used to say to me, you know, we're from good Swedish stock. Have you ever seen your great-grandmother's legs? They start here, and they go all the way down the same width. And that was me. My mom didn't help it, though, because she was a gourmet cook. And she would make all this wonderful food, and then she would leave the house, and my babysitter, Congresswoman Michelle Bachmann, another tidbit from the book. This was during her Cher period because her hair was literally down to here. And I idolized her because my hair never grew past my shoulders. But when my mom would leave the house, she would say, "Now, Michelle, do not let Gretchen eat any of the wonderful food that I made or drink any grape soda." And the minute the door would close, Michelle would be like, "Let's go for it." And my best friend was a girl named Molly. And when she was over at the house and my mom would leave and I would eat a bunch of the food, she'd come home and she'd say, "Who ate it all?" And I'd point to Molly. I'd go, "Molly, she ate it all." The only problem was Molly kept getting thinner and I kept getting fatter. Do you remember Levi's? They used to, I don't know if they still do this or not, but they had the waist size and then the length size, right? Oh, that was horrible for a kid like me. I used to get out the Sharpie right away because it was so embarrassing. I didn't want my waist size to potentially be bigger than my length size. So finally, in 10th grade, it all came down to a boy. I liked this senior in high school. He was on the basketball team. And I overheard him in the hallway of our high school, and he said, "Yeah, I think Gretchen's a really funny, nice girl, but I could never date her because she's too fat." And that day, I went on a diet, and I lost 35 pounds. And no, I never dated him. But this is really the whole point and story of my book, which is I was blessed to build my self-esteem and my self-confidence from the inside of who I was and from my soul. And that's what I want to encourage young people today, especially in 2015 with social media and photoshopping and unrealistic expectations of perfection. It's so important as parents to make sure that we're talking about that, or grandparents with our kids, so that they learn also how to build their self-confidence from the inside. So you might ask, well, how the heck did she go from being a serious violinist to Miss America pageant? And trust me, that was nowhere on my radar screen when I was growing up, obviously. I was a tomboy, I was outside playing football with my brothers, wasn't thinking about pageants. But when I reached the age of 17, I told my parents some devastating news. I went up in their bedroom and said, I want to quit the violin. And they were heartbroken because of the immense investment that I had made thus far in my life. And so my parents wanted me to promise that I would eventually find another way in which to use that talent to accomplish something else. In the meantime, I went off to Stanford to concentrate on my academics, and I studied at Oxford in England, and I got a phone call from my mom. And she said, Gretchen, I just got a brochure in the mail on the Miss America pageant. Did you know that 50% of all the points for a contestant are based on talent? This is something I think you should try. And I said, are you nuts? This was nothing that I had ever thought of. So part of my book chronicles how a novice pageant girl from a state of Minnesota not known for pageant success, who played the classical violin that had never won the Miss America pageant before and has never since, to being short, where my own grandfather, the revered minister, said, you know you're never going to be Miss America. And I said, well, why not? And he said, have you looked in the mirror? You're too short. So I went to the library, this is before the internet, and I looked up every book I could find on Miss America, and I went to the table of contents under height, and I found out that the very first Miss America in 1921, I believe, was Margaret Gorman, 5'1". And I ran back to Grandpa and I said, see, your word isn't always even God's word. I have 2.5 inches on her. I got all the way to Atlantic City, and I had worked really, really hard. I had left Stanford for an entire year to just prepare for this. And when I went to the Stanford dean, who's the only person I told about my goal, she said to me, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. I told no one else. I went home, I went back to the violin, I studied every magazine and newspaper so that I would be ready for the important interview. I got in shape, and then I went to Atlantic City. The final day of competition, you have to say goodbye to your family at like 6 a.m. And my mom just knew to come over to my hotel to see me because there was this computer guy who used to make predictions about who he thought was going to win the pageant and be in the top 10. Now, here's what his criteria was. State you were from, height, eye color, hair color, and talent. Well, guess what? I was nowhere on his top 10 list. And I was devastated. My mom came to the hotel lobby, she grabbed my shoulders, and she shook me. She said, you have worked so hard for this. You can do this. Don't worry about him. Well, I have to tell you that the year after me, he was out of business. And he wrote in a newspaper article that he just had to give up his computer thing because the women were just getting too talented and too smart. But the Miss America experience, I have to tell you, while it was a wonderful communication skill building experience for me, and I use those skills every single day in what I do in television, there was also a negative, really difficult, shocking side that came with that. And it happened to me almost right away. I had been dubbed in a very short period of time the smart Miss America because of where I went to school, and I thought, wow, okay, this is a pretty good headline. Well, the first day I go to New York for my big press conference, and a female reporter there decided that she was going to take me down. And so she decided, she thinks she's smart, I'm going to give her a test. So in the middle of the press conference, she started asking me questions like, who's on the $50 bill? What year did the Vietnam War end? Who's Mary Jo Kopechne? Etc. And she finally got to question number 19. Have you ever done drugs? And the final question, have you ever had sex? At which point, the entire press corps booed her. That's never happened again in New York City. And the two reporters from Minnesota in the front row passed out. I'm kidding, but there is such a thing called Minnesota nice, and it's actually really true, and they were as shocked as I was. So I learned very early on that, wow, some people are just going to really hate me because of this, and my resume is just going to completely evaporate. I also had a celebrity judge that year who didn't think much of me at all either. He was a famous movie director. And the year after, he wrote a scathing book about me, which I will now read an excerpt from. My book. William Goldman, an accomplished and famous screenwriter whose credits included Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid and The Princess Bride, was a judge at the pageant my year. He wrote a book about it the next year, 1990. It's a good thing I didn't know about the book until later, because it might have shaken my confidence a little to read page after page about my inadequacies wrapped around the title he gave me, Miss Piggy. He also called me a God clutcher because I said my faith was important to me. To Goldman, I was also too chunky at 108 pounds. Caveat, I will never be 108 ever again. He seemed downright offended that talent should count as half the score, and he didn't much care for my winning violin performance, which he referred to as fiddling. He admitted to favoring Miss Colorado. Still, his criticism of me throughout the book was a little over the top. His objectification of me and the other women in the pageant was demeaning. Rereading it recently, I was surprised to find it still stung. I was embarrassed, even ashamed. It made me realize that shaming is a potent force. For decades, I hid my feelings about Goldman's takedown because it was so belittling. But I certainly have no reason to feel that way. Now I understand that this kind of degrading talk is what keeps young women from being fully themselves, or even trying. So we learn to build our self-esteem from the inside, and we learn to know ourselves and not let detractors get us down. From my Miss America experience, I had another life works in mysterious ways about how I got into television. I had taken the LSATs. I was on my way to law school, and Miss America turned me completely 180. Do any of you remember the great show that used to be on TV with Dick Clark and Ed McMahon called Bloopers and Practical Jokes? It was awesome, except when you're the target. So a week after becoming Miss America, they set me up for a prank. And I was supposed to explain this complicated satellite system behind me in front of 5,000 engineers in Washington, D.C. That's how they set it up. And that morning, I kept saying to them, I didn't know I was going to be pranked. I kept saying, I'm the kind of person who likes to do research. Could you tell me any more information about this? Or no, you'll be fine. There's other hosts. They'll be with you. You don't really have to say anything. So we get out on the stage, and the other hosts get called off. Emergency phone call, microphone isn't working, and suddenly the floor director in front of the camera says to me, oh my gosh, we're coming to you early. In 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, start talking. So I'm standing there, and I give my little 90-second spiel that I'd learned in the first week of being Miss America, and I stopped talking, and he said, oh no, you have to go on for 15 minutes. They had cue cards. Every word was 15 letters long. They dropped the cue cards on the floor. I was reading them upside down. I was thinking, they are going to fire me as Miss America. Well, 6 months later, that show actually aired on national television. And I remember sitting in my hotel room with the covers over my face by myself, oh, I can't believe the whole world's seeing this. But life works in mysterious ways. Because after that, I got calls from TV agents in California, right here, asking me if I'd ever thought about going into TV. And they said, if you could do that, you can do TV. So I knew my LSAT scores were good for 5 years. So if the TV thing didn't work out, I could still go back to law school. So I went to Richmond, Virginia for my first job. I became the political reporter there at 23 years old, thanks to my boss, who threw me in sink or swim. I then went to Cincinnati, and then I went to Cleveland. And it was there that I met my husband on a blind date. And the week after we got married and came home, I got fired. I want to read for you now the excerpt of what became the toughest year of my life. My instincts were correct. The two-female anchor concept isn't working, he told me bluntly. Side note, we were part of the first two-female primetime local anchor team in the country. Unfortunately, he said, we don't have another position for you at the station based on your salary. Oh, I said, my stomach clenched as I realized my worst fears were being realized. What's going to happen to the broadcast, I asked. Well, Denise is staying on, and we're replacing you with a man, he replied. Then he added, now that you're married, you'll be okay. I was too stunned to respond, but later it was those words, now that you're married, you'll be okay, that upset me. I was so disappointed that after I'd spent 4 years at his station, he still had no idea who I was. I was a professional who had dedicated years to establishing my career, and he had brushed me off with a gratuitous remark. I'd never heard of a man losing his job and being told, don't worry, you're married, you'll be okay. My career had zero to do with whether or not my husband also worked. It had everything to do with my own personal identity, personal goals, and making the most of my life. Toughest year of my life. As you all know, the first year of marriage is a hard transition anyway. And here I was with my self-identity stripped. So I have great empathy for anyone who's ever been fired. I have great empathy for anyone who's still looking for work. And I chronicle in my book this tough, excruciating year and what I did to get back into the game. And the 3 top lessons are, get back in with your family. Even if you're not getting along, you're going to need every single one of them. Number 2, network like you never have before. Even outside of your current profession, call every single person you have ever known because you don't know what might happen. And number 3, be accepting of a job that you may not want to take because sometimes you have to take a step back and work triply hard to get back into the game. And that's what I eventually did. I moved to Dallas, and my husband stayed in Cleveland. So our second year of marriage, we commuted. He eventually came to Dallas, which was great. We were there 9 months, and then we eventually went to New York when I went to work for CBS News. Along the way, for the first time in this book, I also share some incredibly painful stories about sexual harassment. It's too grisly for me to actually describe for you from the microphone. And also how I faced a life-threatening stalker for 4 years, who also stalked my parents. And it's the first time I've ever told this story, only because in researching the book, the woman I was working with said, you have to tell this story to help other women, but I don't want you to tell it if you think he'll come back into your life. And I called my assistant at work, I gave her his name, and we have this brain room, what we call at Fox, our research room, and I said, just see what you can find out about him. And she called me back within 30 minutes, and she said, are you sitting down? And I said, yes. She said, he's dead. So I felt comfortable to be able to share the harrowing story of living in constant fear for 4 years of my life in this book as well. All right, so I've already described kind of the stereotypical treatment I got as Miss America. What happens when you're blonde, a former Miss America, and you end up working at Fox News? All right, I coin it in the book, the bimbo trifecta. Here's an excerpt. I like to joke that when I joined Fox News, I hit the bimbo trifecta, former Miss America, blonde Fox News host. I can joke about it because it doesn't take a rocket scientist to understand that the labels have more to do with silly attitudes and stereotypes than with who I am or whether or not I'm smart. I still scratch my head trying to figure out how being blonde became synonymous in some people's minds with being dumb, or why some people assume attractive women are not smart, but I don't waste my brain cells trying to figure these things out. I've learned that sometimes when people don't like what you have to say, and don't want to debate you on the smart issues of the day, it's just a lot easier to call you a dumb blonde from Fox News. My greatest joy in my life is my family. And I also share in this book my struggles with infertility. I always wanted to have kids, always. I mean, I wanted to work hard and have a great career too, but I always wanted to have children. And when I found out at 35 that I had a 3% chance of having kids and that I had prematurely aging eggs, it was devastating. I can still see the Central Park bench that I was sitting on when I called my mom in New York City and said, "Can you believe this, that I only have a 3% chance?" So that's often a silent pain that couples go through. And I also wanted to let people know that I've also struggled with the same thing. I also have struggled with the having it all mentality for women in our country. And I actually think it's a curse. I talk about that in the book as well. I think it sets us up for automatic failure because let's face it, we can't do it all at the same time. So here's what I say. These days there's an ongoing debate about whether women can have it all, and I've often been asked that question. In fact, the first time was at the Miss America pageant. It was in the interview. I was the only contestant who said no. I didn't mean that women shouldn't fully pursue their dreams, only that we need to be honest with ourselves. I'm a person who likes to give 100% to everything I do. I want to be the best at my job and at being a mom. But I realize I can only give 100% in the moment. If I'm at work, am I giving 100% to my kids? No. And if I'm at home, am I giving 100% to my work? No. So I like to think of it as a balancing act, but worthwhile as long as we don't kid ourselves that we have to be superwoman. So eventually, my husband and I, through, a lot of Chinese food and a lot of wine one night, ended up getting pregnant. And we're blessed with two beautiful children who are 12 and 10 right now, the loves of my life. And I share some funny stories about them in the book as well. Here's what I say. The most wonderful thing about kids is their great curiosity and complete honesty. I would love to capture those priceless moments in the years before they grow up, right? And become guarded and stop sharing every little thing that's on their minds, even when the questions elicit chuckles or embarrassment on the part of adults. Like my daughter Kaya at 3, when we would end our nightly prayers with, "Amen," looking confused and saying to me, "Mommy, why at the end of our prayers do you always say, 'old men'?" Or at 5, on my parents' 50th wedding anniversary, asking my mom, Grandma Karen, "Grandma, are you going to have any more babies?" Or my son Christian at 8, observing that he thought a woman at the pool on vacation had fake boobs. When I picked myself up off the floor and asked him what he meant, he explained, "Well, I knew that they weren't real because, like yours, when you bend over, they fall all the way down. And hers, when she bent over at the pool, Mom, they didn't move." Christian is always bursting with curiosity, asking questions we don't necessarily want to answer. Like the time he saw an ad, countless times actually, during baseball games and asked, "Mommy, what's Viagra?" So what I like to say is that if a chubby little girl from a small town in Minnesota can grow up playing a mean violin and unexpectedly become Miss America and have 25 years in the TV business and do her own national TV show, that if I can do that, I want to inspire young, medium-aged, and elderly that we're never too old to challenge ourselves and go for our dreams. And if you have some goals on a Post-it note that you just haven't gotten around to, I hope that this book will inspire you to do just that. Because if I can do it, you can do it too. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Gretchen. Mrs. Carlson has been gracious enough to take some of our questions, and our first one comes from this young lady right here.
Hi, Gretchen.
Hi.
I wanted to know who challenges you most at work?
My boss. Yeah, it's my inner drive to want to always do well, but even if you have that, I think it's really important to have people who believe in you, who are your bosses. And I have great bosses at Fox News, and by the way, they don't tell me what to say. That's a question I always get asked as well. Do they speak to you in your ear and tell you to say certain things? No, I come up with all my own research, all my own questions, and it's my own knowledge at play during the show. But I do think it's important to have supportive bosses who are also comfortable enough to give you criticism, because that allows you to continue to grow as well.
Next question, back of the room, just to your right.
Hi, Gretchen.
Hi.
Thank you for making the effort to be here today. I've got two questions for you. One is, who has been the favorite person that you've interviewed? And two, being a woman of faith, do you feel the freedom and freedom to share that faith when you're on the air and off the air?
All right, so the favorite person, here's what happens with live TV. I'll even come home that night and my husband will say to me, who was on your show today? And I'll be like, because you're already moving towards the next day. You're already, immediately we have a meeting after the show, like, okay, now who are we going to book tomorrow? Because you're constantly thinking that way with live TV. Listen, I've interviewed every presidential candidate, which is fabulous. I love politics. They're so fickle. They change on a dime, and I think that's fascinating. I have to tell you, the most nervous I've ever been for an interview, because that doesn't make me nervous anymore, is my mom. She came on once to talk about our Swedish traditions, and she brought all the food, and I just wanted to make sure that it went really well for her. And I think sometimes when you know somebody so well, you get more nervous. So definitely the most nervous. But the most compelling interview ever was a couple of years ago after the Tucson shootings, where Congresswoman Gabrielle Giffords was shot, and an 8-year-old little girl was killed that day. And my daughter happened to be 8 at the time. And toughest interview ever, her mom, Roxana Green, the next day wanted to speak to me. And so she called from Arizona, and I was doing Fox and Friends back then for 8 years, and I only had about a 10-minute notice that I was going to be talking to her. And I read about it in the book, where I actually was pinching my leg with my fingernails because I was just trying to make myself strong enough to get through the interview. And she was so courageous and brave. And so that's an interview that it was the toughest interview I've ever done, and one that I will never forget. The faith question is a good one. I'm one of the few national news anchors who actually speaks openly about my faith on the air. And wow, the critics come out right away. But I learned a lot of things after turning 40, and that is that I don't really care. I don't really care what people say about me or what they think, and so I'm going to keep doing it. I have to tell you that when I happen to meet people on the streets, the number one thing they say to me is, thank you so much for speaking about your values, and thank you so much for speaking about your faith. So I figure I'm striking the right nerve, so I'm going to keep doing it.
Next question.
How has working at Fox News been similar and different than working with other networks for you?
Well, totally different, because first of all, it's cable. So I worked at CBS News for 5 years. They only have a morning show and then a half-hour nightly broadcast. That's it. Cable news is 24/7 operational. It's live, it's breaking, it's ever-changing. I'll never forget when I came over to Fox. One of the first few days, I was just sitting in on an afternoon show, and something came across the AP wire, and it said something about the Syrian prime minister or something who had been assassinated a couple of years before, that they had a made arrest in the case. And the producer said to me in my ear, "Oh, just go with this for 4 minutes." I was like, what? I don't know anything about this international story. And so I learned real quickly that cable was completely different. Talk about teaching old dogs new tricks. This is why I'm so into the fact that we all, should continue to challenge ourselves, because coming to cable news was just a totally new, different experience. The ad-lib quality that you have to have is unbelievable, and to go with just a small amount of information. And this happens to me all the time now, even during my current show at 11 a.m. here, but at 2 p.m. on the East Coast, where we'll plan for an entire show, and we might have 10 interviews set up that we've all researched and studied for, and then something happens. And everything goes out the window, and suddenly it's just all breaking news and ad lib, and the producers are in the control room just operating on the fly, trying to find people for me to talk to on the phone, or reporters on the scene. So it's one of the things that I love about the business, because you shouldn't do news if you want to sit at a desk, and you should do news if you want to be stimulated every day and try something new, and it keeps me so interested on a daily basis.
Next question.
Hi, Gretchen. My name is Tanny, and I've been married 100 years, and I want to know, well, 53, okay, and I want to know, what is your most challenging in your marriage, with your work and your marriage? You sort of touched on it, but just a little more for us.
Well, as my brother-in-law knows, my husband also has a successful career, and he's a baseball agent, and so he has to travel a lot as well. The good thing for him is that I love sports. So we never fight over the remote control. But, I have to say that in raising kids, the most important thing is to have a great support system. So we've had the same person with our children for the last 8 years. She lives with us. She's actually more strict than I am, which is fantastic. And so that's incredibly important, to have somebody you can trust like that. Family help. Luckily, we are still blessed to have Michael's parents, my husband's parents with us, and my parents, and although we don't live in the same cities, tremendous amount of emotional support and also physical support from time to time. And my mom once told me that if you ever wanted to try and convince your husband to do something, that you should get a hot tub and a bottle of wine. So I think about that often.
Next question to your right.
Hi, Gretchen. Thank you for coming. I'm just curious how you tie in the whole concept of the self-esteem, raising children who are in today's world, you can't really control so much what they connect with phones and the internet and everything. What are your thoughts on that, and what you see from your perspective with raising your kids and trying to keep a lid on the outside world getting in?
I know, that is the biggest problem for parents right now, right? It's a fine line, because this is how kids communicate with each other now. It used to be that we had one phone line in the house, and you'd be like, get off the phone because I'm waiting for my call, and you get a busy signal. It's a fine line, because they get phones not to talk on the phone. I mean, they get phones to text and to take pictures and do social media. So we were actually the last parents in the entire 6th grade for my daughter for her to get a phone. And she had to earn it. And there was a tremendous amount of pressure on us, just socially, to wait that long. Wow, you haven't gotten her a phone yet? So we did eventually, because I don't want her to be out of the social mix too, because that's how they communicate. So it's a conundrum for parents. It's one of the reasons that I talk so openly about the hate that is spewed on me and has been throughout my life in this book, because I do want to raise a national conversation about where are we going with all of this. Kids are committing suicide over one comment on Twitter or Facebook or Instagram. That's not acceptable to me. And so I really wanted to talk about not so much what I face, but to bring a national conversation about where are we going with this? And is this how we want our kids to continue to be raised? And I don't know, honestly, I don't know if we can stop it. But I at least wanted to bring a conversation about it.
Next question, back in the center section.
Thank you for coming to this part of the country.
Thank you.
Read a book about Roger Ailes. Now, how does he interact with you and the other TV personalities?
So she's asking about Roger Ailes, who started Fox and just signed a new contract. So I guess he's going to be there for another 4 to 5 years. Listen, he always has an open door. I mean, I meet with him more than I do with other executives. And I love to do that because he's brilliant at TV. He was the first person who really started commentary during prime time. And what he had figured out was that people were already getting their news of the day at work and on their phones. And so by the time they got home from work at night, they had already heard a lot of the news, and they wanted to hear opinions. Even if they didn't agree with them, they wanted to hear just sort of a different point of view or a debate. And he really started that when he started Fox News. So I love to pick his brain because, listen, if I can get any kind of advice from him, he knows what he's doing, I'm going to take it.
Next question to your right, back of the room.
Hi, my name is Peggy. I would like to ask you, for your 1 hour show, how much time advanced that you have to prepare for it? And then my second question is, in front of the TV, you smile, everything goes smoothly. Is there any time, that you have any, oh my God, oh no, that kind of interesting story you want to share with us?
So she asking about struggles?
Yeah, she wants to know how much time you take to prepare before your show, and
Okay.
if there's ever been an oh my God moment.
Oh gosh, daily. How much time for my show? So it's ever moving. I'll just start in the morning. We have a conference call at 7:45. I have to tell you, after doing Fox and Friends for 8 years, that was a 3-hour show, and I had to get up at 3:45 a.m. and set 3 alarms. But I never overslept, which was good track record. But actually doing a 1-hour show that I'm in charge of is way more work. So you can't really slack at all. And so we do a 7:45 conference call where we sort of discuss the big stories of the day, who we might want to book, and we have specific people who are called bookers, and all they do is have a huge Rolodex and go through and figure out who might be the best guest for a particular story. And we talk about topics. Well, I like this angle for the political panel today, or we really need to get an expert from the CIA, or whatever the stories happen to be. So we have that initial call, and then we all go off and do all of our work, and it's a huge teamwork effort that goes into putting on 1 hour of television. And then we have another conference call, or in person, at 11 a.m. in our offices in New York City. And then we do the show live Eastern time, 2 to 3, and then we have an immediate, what we call a post-mortem meeting, and we discuss, what went really well, what didn't go so well, and what we want to move on for tomorrow. Some stories, it's continuing stories, so we want to find new guests for that, and sometimes everything's just totally different.
Next question.
Aloha.
Aloha.
I am a big fan of Fox News,
Thanks.
and I must say you're even more beautiful in person.
Oh, well, I'll take that, thanks.
But will you please tell me, Mr. Bill O'Reilly,
Uh-oh.
to stop interrupting his guests?
You want me to do that? Listen, O'Reilly's, I'm going to call him O'Reilly because he always calls me Carlson. His office is 4 doors down from me, and you can always tell when Bill's coming to the office because there's like this rush of wind and people following him as he's coming down the hallway. He's 6'6". He's really, really tall. So imagine him next to me when I have on flip-flops. Woo! But he doesn't scare me. He's actually a teddy bear behind the scenes. He's actually a really intensely private person and incredibly quiet. I know that's hard to believe, but it's true. I don't know if I'm going to risk telling him to stop interrupting. I got to think about that, but I'll do my best.
We have time for one more question. It's here at the back of the room.
Thank you. Hi, we have a local pageant called the Miss Yorba Linda Miss Placentia Scholarship Program, and I'm on the board. I love what you're saying about being a chunky girl and what girls grow up with and the struggles that we do have. I only wish that there were more young girls that heard what you said today. And I was wondering, do you talk to the girls that are currently, trying to go through these programs? They're in California right now in Fresno, trying out for Miss California.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your volunteerism in the organization, because that's really what keeps the Miss America pageant going, is the grassroots efforts. All the people at the local pageants and state pageants are volunteers, so thank you. I'm on the board of directors now for the Miss America pageant, so the bad side of that is that I can't meet with contestants at all, at any phase, I know, because I can't give any advice. So I do feel bad about that now that I've been on the board for the last 3 years, but I'll share this with you, that when parents ask me, how do I get my girl to become Miss America, I tell them, don't do pageants. I'm not a big believer in pageants for little tiny kids. kids need to build their self-esteem in other ways first. So I always say, have them practice the piano and have them concentrate on a sport or do well in school. And then once they know who they are, if they want to make that decision, that's fine. In fact, my daughter, I never even told my daughter that I was Miss America. Somebody else told her when she was 8. And she came home from school and she said, Mom, somebody told me that you were like some America thing. And I was like, uh-oh, the day has come. So she wanted to see, the crown and the gown and all that. And it was probably a little bit of a letdown because it's not like I have it hanging up somewhere in my house. The crown's in the same box that my dad FedExed it to me when I lived in Dallas. And so I showed her that. It still has the bobby pins actually and the elastic that they put across so that you can actually stick it on your head. And my gown is in a shoebox, because it weighs more than 10 pounds. It's solid beads. So if you actually hunt it up, it would ruin it over time. So the best place actually is in a shoebox. And so I showed her that. And actually for my 25th anniversary last year, I thought to myself, wow, I wonder if I could get into that thing again and wear it when I give a speech in Atlantic City for my 25th anniversary. So I called up the designer who made the gown for me. We're still friends. He lives in New York City. I said, Steve, I got this harebrained idea. This was Tuesday. I was giving the speech Saturday. I said, do you think I could still get my big toe into that gown? There was dead silence on the end of the phone. I'm like, Steve. I'm like, why are you not responding? He's like, you think you're going to get that on? He goes, thank God for Spanx. So we go to this bra shop on Broadway where all the actors go, and they put a bunch of contraptions on me, and I'm behind the curtain with this woman. She got the darn thing zipped up. Whew. And we opened the curtain, and he's standing there, and he goes, oh my gosh, your boobs look amazing. And I said, thank you, I've had 2 kids. And I guess we'll end on that note.
Ladies and gentlemen, Gretchen Carlson, let's give her a round of applause.